I never expected to be laughing at my own father's funeral. But there I was, standing in the cold morning air, dressed in a black suit that suddenly felt too tight, my mind a mess of emotions, and then my wife leaned in, her voice just above a whisper, delivering a sentence so absurd, so outlandishly brazen, that I couldn't help myself. I changed the locks on the $30 million condo you inherited. If you're not okay with it, maybe we should split. It was the way she said it, casual, like she was discussing dinner plans, like my father's body wasn't resting a few feet away, like she hadn't just seized something that wasn't hers, like she hadn't just made the biggest mistake of her life. I turned to her, searching for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of guilt in those perfectly lined eyes. But Rachel was steady, composed, lips pressed in that confident smirk she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. And that's when the laugh escaped me. Not a chuckle, not a dry, bitter scoff. A full, unrestrained burst of laughter. One that shattered the solemn air of mourning and had heads turning in our direction. Her smirk faltered. "Daniel," she hissed, gripping my arm. "What the hell is so funny?" I wiped at my eyes, shaking my head. "You," I said, still grinning. "You have no idea, do you?" Rachel stiffened beside me, her grip tightening. I could almost hear the gears in her head turning, trying to decipher what had just happened. She had been so sure of herself, so certain that she had just backed me into a corner I couldn't escape. But what she didn't realize, what she had never cared to understand, was that my father was always 10 steps ahead, and so was I. The funeral had been draining in every way imaginable. Losing my father was like losing the ground beneath me. He was the man who had built everything from scratch, who had taught me discipline, who had made sure that even with our wealth, I understood the value of hard work. And yet, in the midst of grief, I could see it in Rachel's eyes, the barely concealed anticipation. It had started the moment we arrived at the cemetery. While I was shaking hands, accepting condolences, trying to keep myself together, Rachel had been busy doing something else entirely. Watching, calculating. She wasn't mourning the loss of a great man. No, she was mourning something else. The fact that, until now, my father had always been there, standing as an invisible wall between her and the fortune she so desperately wanted access to. And now, that wall was gone. I should have seen this coming. I should have known when she insisted on sitting next to me at the front, gripping my hand a little too tightly, whispering the occasional, "We'll get through this together." I should have known when she asked, twice, if my father had left a formal reading of his will. And I definitely should have known when, 2 nights ago, she had been in a strangely good mood despite knowing that I had spent the entire day dealing with lawyers and estate matters. She had been waiting for the right moment to strike. And in her mind, this was it. "You changed the locks?" I repeated, still shaking my head in disbelief. "On the condo. My condo." Rachel crossed her arms. "Well, it's our condo now." The audacity. This woman, even in the middle of a funeral, even surrounded by my father's closest friends and family, she was boldly declaring her ownership over something that didn't belong to her. I looked away for a moment, inhaling deeply, trying to calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. There was anger, yes, betrayal, but above all, there was amusement. Because Rachel had played her hand too soon, and she had no idea that she had just set herself up for disaster. "You really think that's how this works?" I asked, voice low, steady. Rachel tilted her head, feigning confusion. "Daniel, we're married. What's yours is mine." That was where she was wrong. My father had taught me better than to mix emotions with wealth. And he had definitely taught me better than to put my assets under someone else's control without safeguards. Rachel didn't know it yet, but the condo, the very thing she thought she had seized, was legally untouchable. She had changed the locks on a property she had no legal right to. She had essentially locked herself out of her own trap. And now, I had the perfect opportunity to show her exactly what happens when greed clouds judgment. I leaned in, mirroring her earlier stance, my voice just as low, just as casual. "Rachel," I said, "do you know what's really funny?" She frowned. "What?" I smiled. Not a warm one. Not a kind one. "The condo isn't even under my name." Her entire body went rigid. I watched as her confidence wavered for the first time, her lips parting slightly, her hands twitching like she wanted to snatch back her words. What do you mean?" she asked, voice quieter now. I let the silence stretch between us, savoring the moment. "I mean," I said slowly, "the condo isn't something you can just claim. It belongs to a trust, a legal trust. And you, Rachel," I let my voice drop even lower, "are not on it. I swear. If it had been any other moment, I would have taken a picture of her face. Shock, realization, and then, the best part, fear. Because she had played the wrong game with the wrong man. And now, she was about to lose. Rachel took a step back, her lips pressing together so tightly they turned white. "Daniel," she started, her voice softer now, no longer filled with the arrogance she had carried moments ago. I simply turned away. "I need to go bury my father," I said, my tone final. "We'll discuss this later." But we wouldn't, because there was nothing to discuss. Rachel had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and in the days to come, she was going to learn that the hard way. I grew up in a house where money was abundant, but discipline was stricter than any bank vault. My father built everything from the ground up, a man who believed wealth wasn't just about having money, but about knowing how to control it. He had an ironclad philosophy. Money should work for you, not the other way around. And if you let greed or recklessness take over, you wouldn't just lose your wealth, you'd lose yourself. That was the first lesson I ever learned about money. From the outside, people saw luxury. They saw the towering mansion, the gated estate, the cars that never had a speck of dust on them. They assumed my life was filled with extravagant gifts, unlimited spending, and carefree indulgence. They couldn't have been more wrong. My father made sure that despite the empire he built, I would never grow up entitled. My allowance wasn't excessive, just enough to get by, like any other kid in the neighborhood. I didn't have a chauffeur. I took the school bus. When I asked for the latest gaming console, my father didn't just say no. He made me write an argument explaining why I deserved it, what value it would add to my life, and how I planned to earn the money to buy it myself. At the time, I thought it was unfair. I thought, why have money if you can't enjoy it? But as I got older, I realized what he was doing. He wasn't just withholding things for the sake of it. He was teaching me how to separate want from need, how to respect money instead of expecting it to appear out of thin air. Rachel never understood this. She thought wealth meant mindless spending, a never-ending fountain of luxury that should be enjoyed without question. She didn't understand that every dollar had a purpose. And more importantly, she didn't understand the one rule my father drilled into me. Never mix emotions with finances. It started in school. I wasn't the richest kid in my class, but my family's wealth was no secret. And when people know you have money, they assume you're their personal bank. "Hey Daniel, can you lend me $20? "Daniel, my mom says you could probably afford to sponsor the whole school trip, right? "Daniel, just cover lunch today, man. It's not like you're gonna miss it." It was never just a request. It was an expectation. And when I said no, people looked at me differently. Like I was selfish. Like I was hoarding my wealth instead of sharing it like a community pot. One time, I accidentally broke a friend's video game console. I told him I didn't have the money to replace it right away, which was true. I had to wait for my allowance. But word got around that I was refusing to pay, and suddenly, I was the rich kid who didn't care about his friends. That was my first real taste of how money changes people. Not just the ones who have it, but the ones who don't. One night, after hearing that some kids at school were calling me selfish, my father sat me down. He looked at me the way he always did when he wanted to make sure his words stuck. "Daniel, listen to me. People will always expect things from you because of what we have. But you are not obligated to give. If someone asks for money and you don't want to lend it, you say no. And you don't owe anyone an explanation. If they're truly your friends, money won't change that." I nodded, but he wasn't done. "And one more thing, never let anyone make you feel guilty for what's yours. If someone gets angry because you didn't give them money, then they were never your friend to begin with." That lesson carried me through life. And that was why, when Rachel started making little comments about our wealth, about our finances, about our shared future with my inheritance, I immediately recognized what was happening. At first, it was small things. Rachel would jokingly say, "You know, we should be living in a house way bigger than this." Whenever we visited luxury properties, she'd laugh about how funny it was that I drove a car that wasn't top of the line when I could easily afford the best. But then it escalated. After my father got sick, she started bringing up financial security more often. "We should sit down and go over our assets, just to be prepared. Have you spoken to the lawyers about what happens if your mom can't handle everything on her own? Do you think it would be a good idea to move into the family condo full-time? It seems like such a waste otherwise." That last one stuck with me, because waste was a word my father used when talking about frivolous spending. It was a word he used when referring to people who had money but no sense of responsibility. Rachel didn't see the condo as a home or as a part of my father's legacy. She saw it as an opportunity. And I knew then that she didn't just want the money. She expected it to be hers. I should have paid attention to the signs earlier. The way she talked about wealth as if it was something to be used, not earned. The way she got uncomfortable whenever I refused to spend on things that weren't necessary. The way she subtly inserted herself into financial conversations that didn't concern her. Looking back, it was so obvious. But I was blinded by the relationship, by the belief that she loved me for who I was, not for what I had. And that's why, when she told me at my father's funeral that she had changed the locks on my condo, I laughed. Because I had spent my whole life learning how to protect what was mine. And she had just made the biggest mistake of hers. I once believed that love was the strongest foundation a marriage could have. That if two people genuinely cared for each other, they could overcome anything. Disagreements, hardships, differences in opinion. I thought love was the glue that held everything together. But I was wrong. Love alone isn't enough. Because trust is the real foundation. And once that crumbles, once the cracks form, no amount of love can patch them up. I learned this lesson the hard way. I learned it when I married Rachel. I met Rachel when I was 38. It wasn't one of those dramatic love at first sight moments, but it was easy, comfortable. She was sharp, confident, and had a way of making people feel like they were the only person in the room. I liked that about her. We started dating casually, and over time, it became something deeper. She wasn't just my girlfriend. She was my best friend. Or at least, I thought she was. She made me feel like I was more than just my family name, more than my wealth. Unlike the people who whispered about my background or tried to befriend me for the wrong reasons, Rachel never made me feel like a walking bank account. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone saw me. Not the money, not the legacy, just Daniel. And that was why, 2 years later, when I got down on one knee and asked her to marry me, I did it without hesitation. She said yes. And for a while, I thought I had made the best decision of my life. But love has a way of blinding you to things you should be paying attention to. And I missed all the warning signs. At first, nothing changed. We were happy. We traveled, hosted dinners, built a life together. She made our house feel like a home, filled with warmth and laughter. But then, little by little, things started shifting. Rachel started asking more questions about our finances. At first, they seemed innocent enough. Do you think we should look into more investment properties? What kind of savings plan do we have for the future? Have you ever considered merging our assets? It would make things easier. The questions were subtle, woven into casual conversations. But over time, I started noticing a pattern. She never asked about our finances, only mine. She never suggested using her own savings for investments, only mine. And then came the little jabs. You work so hard, Daniel, but don't you think it's time we started enjoying life a little more? It's weird that we live in such a nice house, but don't drive the latest cars, don't you think? We could be living like royalty, but you're so careful with money. Almost like you don't trust me. That last one stung. Because I did trust her. Or at least, I wanted to. But my father had always warned me about letting emotions cloud financial decisions. Daniel, love is important, but don't ever forget. Money changes people. Sometimes in ways you won't see until it's too late. I had dismissed his words back then, convinced that my marriage was different. That Rachel was different. But the truth was creeping up on me. After we had been married for about a year, my father invited us over for dinner. It was nothing formal, just a quiet night with family. Rachel had been unusually excited about it. "I think your dad really likes me," she had said, fixing her hair in the mirror. "Maybe tonight we can talk to him about your inheritance. You know, just so we understand what's coming in the future." I had frowned at that. "Understand what's coming?" I repeated. She had laughed it off. "I just mean, we should be prepared. You know, in case anything happens. It's smart to have a plan." That was the first time I felt it, that nagging, uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. But I let it go. And I shouldn't have. Because the moment we walked into my father's house, Rachel wasn't focused on family. She was focused on everything else. Her eyes flickered over the furniture, the art on the walls, the fine china my mother kept for special occasions. She asked questions, too many questions, about the property, about my father's assets, about what was really included in his estate. I watched as my father's expression slowly shifted from polite interest to quiet calculation. And in that moment, I knew. He saw what I had refused to see. Rachel didn't just love me. She loved the idea of what I could give her. And she was planning for a future where she had full access to it. A few months later, my father got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Advanced. The diagnosis hit our family hard. I spent as much time with him as possible, making sure he was comfortable, taking care of whatever he needed. Rachel, on the other hand, seemed distant. She wasn't concerned about his health. She was concerned about what happened after. One night, while I sat at his bedside in the hospital, Rachel called me. "Hey, I was thinking, should we meet with a lawyer? Just to make sure everything with the estate is in order. Your mom is getting older, and if anything happens, we should know where things stand." I clenched my jaw, gripping the armrest of my chair. "Rachel, my father is still alive." "I know that," she said quickly. "But don't you think it's responsible to be prepared? I mean, you don't want to end up in some legal battle later." Legal battle. That was the moment I knew I had made a mistake marrying her. She wasn't worried about me. She wasn't worried about my family. She was worried about making sure she got her share. And suddenly, I saw everything so clearly. The hints, the conversations, the way she had slowly but surely planted herself into my financial decisions. Rachel had never married me. She had married an investment. And when the time came, she would make sure she got everything she felt entitled to. I just didn't know that moment would come at my father's funeral. That was when she played her final card. And that was when she lost everything. My father was the kind of man who never got sick. At least, that's what it felt like growing up. He was disciplined, early morning jogs, a strict diet, regular checkups. He didn't believe in laziness, didn't believe in excuses. If something was wrong, he fixed it. Simple as that. So when my mother called me one evening, her voice strained, telling me that my father had been admitted to the hospital, my world shifted beneath me. "It's pancreatic cancer, Daniel." Those words landed like a hammer to my chest. I sat in silence, gripping the phone, as she explained that it had already spread too far for surgery to help. He had been hiding his discomfort for months, not wanting to worry us. Now, we were out of time. I needed to see him. But before I could even process my next move, Rachel, who had been sitting beside me, scrolling on her phone, spoke up. "You should ask about the estate while he's still well enough to talk." I turned to her so fast my neck nearly snapped. "What?" She shrugged. "I mean, we just got married, Daniel. This stuff matters. This stuff." My father, was in a hospital bed, being told he had months, maybe weeks left. And she was talking about assets? The uneasy feeling I had been ignoring for months punched me right in the gut. Rachel wasn't thinking about him. She was thinking about what was coming after him. The first time I saw my father in that hospital room, the air left my lungs. He looked smaller. His once broad shoulders that had carried my childhood, my mistakes, my successes, seemed fragile now. But when he smiled, when he reached for my hand, I saw it. The same fire in his eyes. "Still got some fight in me," he said, squeezing my palm. "Don't start writing me off just yet." I forced a laugh, sitting beside him. We talked for hours. About everything and nothing. He didn't want to dwell on the illness. He wanted to know about my work, about my plans for the future, about how married life was treating me. I hesitated. But before I could answer, My mother stepped in, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "We're going to fight this," she said softly, but the pain in her eyes told me she knew better. That night when I got home, I sat in silence for a long time. Rachel sat beside me, her fingers tapping lightly against her glass of wine. "Did he say anything about the will?" she finally asked. I turned my head slowly, staring at her. "Rachel." "What?" "It's just," she sighed, setting her glass down. "I'm just saying it's better to talk about these things while he's still here. It would give everyone peace of mind." "Everyone?" I let out a slow breath, my hands curling into fists. "My father is dying," I said, my voice low. "And you want to talk about his money?" Rachel rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Daniel. Don't make it sound so." She paused, trying to pick her words carefully. "This is about being practical." Practical. That word stayed with me, haunting me in ways I couldn't explain. This wasn't practical. This was greed, dressed up as concern. And the worst part? She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. The following weeks were a blur. I spent every free moment at the hospital, watching my father deteriorate, feeling helpless. Rachel came once. For exactly 20 minutes. She sat on the edge of the chair, legs crossed, looking at her phone when she thought no one was watching. She barely said a word to my father, barely acknowledged my mother's grief. And when we got back in the car, the first thing she said was, "So, did he mention anything about the condo?" Something inside me snapped. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Are you serious right now?" Rachel sighed, leaning back in her seat. "Daniel, I know this is hard for you, but at some point, you need to think about our future." "Our future?" I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. "Yes, our future. Your father's estate is a huge deal. We need to make sure everything is in order before he died." That was what she meant. I pulled into our driveway, turned off the engine, and stared at the dashboard. "I think you should stay somewhere else for a few days," I said finally. Rachel scoffed. "Are you serious?" "Yeah." I swallowed. "I am." She stared at me, waiting for me to take it back. But I didn't. And that was the first time I saw it in her eyes. Panic. Not because she was afraid of losing me. Because she was afraid of losing the money. 3 weeks later, my father passed away. I held his hand in his final moments, my mother on the other side of the bed. He squeezed my palm, just barely, and gave me a tired smile. "Daniel." His voice was weak, but his eyes were strong. "You already know what to do." I nodded, even though my throat was too tight to speak, because I did know. The funeral was a blur of condolences and quiet grief. But amidst the mourning, Rachel saw her chance. And she took it. She leaned in, her voice soft but sharp. "I changed the locks on the $30 million condo you got. If you're not okay with it, maybe we should split." Just like that. Like it was some kind of business transaction. I turned to her, and for the first time, I saw her exactly as she was. Not as my wife, not as my partner, but as someone who had been waiting for this. And that's when I laughed. Because she had no idea what she had just done to herself. Rachel had spent our entire marriage believing she had positioned herself perfectly, that she was entitled to what was mine. That love, or at least the illusion of it, was enough to secure her place in my world. But she had made one fatal mistake. She had underestimated me. Because the condo she had locked me out of, it was never hers to take. And now, she was about to learn what happens when you try to play a game without knowing the rules. The moment Rachel told me she changed the locks on the $30 million condo, I knew she had been waiting for this. She had been patient, subtle, playing her part as the devoted wife, all while biding her time for the moment she thought she could claim what she believed was hers. But she had no idea how badly she had just exposed herself. I let the laughter escape me, not just because of how ridiculous her statement was, but because of the sheer arrogance behind it. I turned to her, watching as the confidence in her expression wavered ever so slightly. "Rachel," I said, still amused, "you really think that's how this works?" Her lips twitched. "Daniel, we're married. What's yours is mine." I tilted my head, watching her closely. "That's interesting. Because as far as I remember, I was the one who inherited that condo, not us. Her expression hardened, but she tried to keep up the act. I'm not trying to take it from you, Daniel. I just think we should be practical. We're a team, aren't we? A team. That was her favorite word to use whenever she wanted to justify crossing a boundary. But I had seen too many signs, ignored too many red flags, and at this moment, I was done pretending. I took a deep breath, watching her carefully. So, tell me, Rachel, when exactly did you change the locks? Her confidence faltered for just a second before she recovered. Does it matter? I smiled. It does to me. She exhaled sharply, then shrugged like it was no big deal. A few days ago, while you were busy with the funeral arrangements, that hit me like a punch to the gut. While I was grieving, while I was trying to process the loss of the man who raised me, she had been handling her priorities, securing what she believed was her share of the wealth. And that told me everything I needed to know. You didn't even wait until after the funeral, I said, more to myself than to her. Rachel sighed, clearly growing impatient. Daniel, don't be dramatic. This is about our future. I laughed again, but this time it was hollow. No, Rachel, this is about you. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. I don't get why you're making this such a big deal. I'm your wife. I should have access to everything we own. I raised a brow. We own? Last I checked, my father left the condo to me. Her eyes flashed with irritation. That's semantics. A marriage is about sharing. Or do you not believe in that? Oh, I believed in sharing. I just didn't believe in being played. I inhaled deeply, shaking my head. You really think you have any claim to that condo? Rachel's confidence returned, and she lifted her chin. Legally? Yes. I spoke to someone about it and I held up a hand, cutting her off. And there it is. She blinked. What? You spoke to someone about my inheritance, about something you had no right to. While I was mourning my father, her lips pressed together, and for the first time, I saw something other than arrogance in her eyes. I saw doubt. She had assumed I'd cave, that I'd let this slide. She didn't expect me to push back. And she definitely didn't expect me to already have the upper hand. I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice calm. Rachel, you really should have done your research before pulling this stunt. She frowned. What does that mean? I smiled. It means that the condo isn't even in my personal name. Silence. Complete, utter silence. Her face paled. What? I nodded, letting the weight of my words settle. You heard me. The condo was placed into a trust before my father passed. A legally protected trust. And guess what? You're not on it. The color drained from her face entirely. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her mind was racing, trying to process how her grand scheme had just crumbled right in front of her. You, she started, her voice shaky. You're lying. I tilted my head. You sure about that? She blinked rapidly, gripping her arms tightly. I could almost hear the panic in her head. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She thought she had played the game perfectly. She thought she had me cornered. But she had underestimated me. And now, she was about to feel the consequences. Rachel suddenly straightened, forcing a smile. Okay, maybe I overstepped a little. But you can add me to the trust now, right? We can fix this. I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. Fix this? She nodded, stepping closer. Yes. I mean, you're my husband. This should be ours. That was the moment I realized she had never loved me. Not really. She had loved the security I provided, the lifestyle I gave her. But love? Love had never been part of the equation for her. I took a slow breath, looking her dead in the eye. No, Rachel, we can't fix this. Her smile faltered. Daniel, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, I cut in. I was reasonable when I ignored every red flag. I was reasonable when I tried to convince myself that you weren't after my money. But I'm done being reasonable now. Her nostrils flared. So what? You're just going to throw away our marriage over this? I exhaled, shaking my head. No, Rachel. You threw it away the moment you prioritized money over me. Her jaw clenched, her hands balling into fists. Fine, she snapped. If this is how you're going to be, Then maybe we should split. I didn't even hesitate. Maybe we should. She flinched, like she had expected me to beg, to fight for this marriage. But I wasn't going to fight for someone who had already betrayed me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt relief. Because this was the beginning of her downfall, and I was going to watch every second of it unfold. Rachel had always been confident, no, cocky, when it came to getting what she wanted. She carried herself like a queen, convinced that she could maneuver any situation to her advantage. And for the longest time, I let her believe it. But this time, she had played the wrong game with the wrong man. Because the condo she thought she had claimed, the one she had so proudly locked me out of, it wasn't hers to take. And now, she was about to learn exactly what happens when greed blinds you to reality. Rachel stood across from me, her arms folded, her jaw clenched. You're really not going to fight for this marriage? I almost laughed. Rachel, you're the one who threatened divorce. Not me. Her lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to throw her words back at her. I saw it then, the doubt creeping in. She thought she had all the power in this situation, that I would panic, that I would beg, that I would offer her something to keep her from leaving. But I was done playing her game. You changed the locks, I continued, on a property you don't even own. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. Daniel, I held up a hand. No, let's be clear about something. You went behind my back. You assumed you had control, but you never stopped to ask the most important question. She blinked. Which is? I let the silence stretch before answering. Did you ever actually own it? Rachel flinched. That was the moment it hit her. She had spent all this time scheming, maneuvering, trying to claim something that was never within her grasp to begin with. And now, she was about to pay the price for it. The next morning, I made a call. One simple phone call. And by the afternoon, Rachel was standing outside the condo, her arms waving wildly as she tried to argue with security. But I live here, she shrieked. The guard remained unfazed, glancing down at the tablet in his hand. Ma'am, the legal owner of this property has requested that you be removed from the premises. Rachel's face turned red. I'm his wife. That's irrelevant, he responded flatly. The owner has full rights to determine who has access. And according to the updated system, you do not. I stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching the entire scene unfold. Rachel spotted me and stormed over. You did this? I raised a brow. You mean, did I take back control of my own property? Yeah, Rachel, I did. She exhaled sharply. Daniel, you can't be serious. We're married. I tilted my head. Are we? Because last I checked, you said maybe we should split. Her face twisted in frustration. That was in the heat of the moment. I sighed. Rachel, this is over. You went too far, and now you're dealing with the consequences. She scoffed. So what? You're just kicking me out? I shrugged. No, you can go back to our house. The one I bought. The one you never contributed a dime to. But this place? You never had a claim to it. And you never will. Her mouth opened, then closed. She had nothing to say. Because for once, there was no excuse, no manipulation, no quick save that could fix what she had done. She had lost. And she knew it. But just when I thought Rachel's humiliation had reached its peak, the final blow landed. 2 days later, she showed up at my office unannounced. Her face was pale, her eyes wild with desperation. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice unusually shaky. I leaned back in my chair. This should be interesting. She swallowed hard. I need your help. That caught my attention. With what? She hesitated, her fingers twisting together. I made a mistake. I stared at her. Rachel, you made a lot of mistakes. Be specific. She exhaled shakily. When I changed the locks, I had a lawyer handle the paperwork. I nodded slowly. Go on. She looked away. He said he could transfer the ownership to my name without your permission. That since we were married, I had a legal claim. I raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. He asked for a fee? Rachel's throat bobbed. $360,000. A low whistle escaped me. Damn, that's rough. She gritted her teeth. Daniel. I held up a hand. And let me guess, after you paid him, he disappeared? Her silence told me everything I needed to know. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. You really let yourself get scammed trying to steal from me? Rachel flinched, her eyes shining with a mix of anger and humiliation. I trusted him. I laughed, unable to help myself. That's ironic. Because I trusted you. She looked down, shame flickering across her face. Daniel, please. Please. That was a word she had never used before. She wasn't pleading for our marriage. She wasn't pleading for me. She was pleading because she had lost. And I wasn't about to save her. Rachel made one last attempt to fix things. I know I messed up, she admitted, her voice quieter now. But we can move past this. I shook my head. No, Rachel. I can move past this. You? You're stuck with the choices you made. Her breath hitched. You don't mean that. I leaned forward, my expression unreadable. I do. Silence. Then she exhaled sharply, squaring her shoulders. Fine. Then I guess we're done. I nodded. I guess we are. And just like that, she walked out. No dramatic outburst. No final plea. Just quiet defeat. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Rachel had always carried herself like someone who could never lose. Even when she was wrong, she had a way of twisting reality to make it seem like she was the victim. She was confident, composed, and always seemed to land on her feet. But this time, she had lost. And I was going to watch every second of her downfall unfold. After our last conversation, after she realized that not only was she out of the condo, but she had also been scammed out of $360,000, Rachel tried to do what she did best. She tried to recover. I heard from mutual friends that she was telling people that she was the one who decided to leave the marriage, that I had been too controlling about money, that she was better off without me. I let her talk, because I knew the truth. And soon enough, reality would catch up with her. It started with the small things. She had been so sure that the condo was hers that she had spent money like it was guaranteed. Luxury shopping sprees, expensive dinners, first-class flights to nowhere. She had lived recklessly, thinking she was sitting on a fortune. But once she realized she had no claim to the property, her financial situation spiraled. She stopped posting extravagant vacations on social media. She stopped flashing designer bags and jewelry. And soon, she stopped showing up to places where she couldn't fake her lifestyle anymore. The walls were closing in, and she knew it. Rachel had assumed that, even if she lost the condo, she could still walk away with a decent settlement from the divorce. After all, we had been married for a few years. In her mind, she was entitled to something. What she didn't know, I had been prepared for this from the moment we said I do. Thanks to my father's teachings, and the very expensive lawyer he introduced me to, I had a prenuptial agreement that was ironclad. Rachel hadn't cared about the prenup when we first got married. At the time, she had smiled, laughed, and waved it off, saying, I don't care about the money, Daniel. I just want you. But now, she cared. Because the prenup made sure that she walked away with nothing. No condo, no inheritance, no stake in my assets, nothing. When she first saw the terms of the prenup, Rachel was livid. She stormed into our lawyer's office, demanding that it be renegotiated. This isn't fair, she snapped. I was his wife. I deserve something. My lawyer remained calm, flipping through the documents. Mrs. Clark, he said evenly, you signed this agreement voluntarily. You were given ample opportunity to review it before marriage. She shook her head. I didn't think it would actually matter. That was the moment she realized she had been playing a game without reading the rules. Rachel, in all her arrogance, had assumed she could manipulate her way into my finances. She had assumed that, because we were married, she would get a payday no matter what. She had never actually considered the possibility that she could walk away with absolutely nothing. But that's exactly what was happening, and the panic in her eyes told me that she finally understood. Once she realized she wasn't getting any money from me, Rachel's life took a turn she hadn't prepared for. She had never been good with finances. Her entire lifestyle had been built around spending rather than saving. She had always relied on the assumption that I would take care of things. But now, she was on her own. And for the first time, Rachel had to face the consequences of her choices. She tried to maintain her old life for a while. She still went to expensive brunches with the same women who had admired her lavish lifestyle. But soon, they started noticing the changes. She wasn't offering to cover the bill anymore. She wasn't carrying the newest designer bag or wearing the latest jewelry. She wasn't posting Instagram stories from exotic locations. And in their world, that was social suicide. One by one, the people she once called friends began to distance themselves. Because Rachel without money wasn't someone they cared about. I should have expected it, but part of me was still surprised when, a few months after the divorce was finalized, Rachel reached out. She texted me late one night. "Rachel, can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, because I already knew what this was. She didn't miss me. She missed security. She missed the life she had when she was with me. She had thought she could replace me, that she could find someone else who would finance her lifestyle. But after months of failing, of watching her once glamorous life crumble, she had run out of options. And now, she was reaching for the last branch before she fell completely. I didn't reply, but I wasn't cruel. I wasn't going to rub salt in the wound. So, instead, I blocked her number. For good. Months later, I ran into her by accident. She didn't see me at first. She was standing outside a cafe, talking to someone. But she wasn't the same woman I had married. Her clothes, once perfectly tailored and dripping with wealth, were now simple, practical. Her hair, always professionally styled, was now pulled back in a way that looked more rushed than intentional. She was laughing, but there was a tightness in her expression, a tiredness. She looked like someone who had learned a lesson she never wanted to learn. And for a brief moment, I felt something almost like pity, but only for a moment. Because this was the life she had chosen. She had bet on greed. She had gambled on entitlement. And she had lost. I turned and walked away, leaving Rachel in the past where she belonged. Because my life was finally mine again. And I wasn't going to waste another second looking back. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you finally remove someone toxic from your life. It's not immediate, and it's not something you celebrate with fireworks or a toast. It's quieter than that. It's waking up and realizing you don't have to be on edge anymore. It's not having to explain your decisions to someone who only sees you as a wallet. It's feeling lighter, even though nothing visible has changed. That's what my life felt like in the months following my divorce from Rachel. For the first time in years, I was free. At first, people kept asking questions. How are you holding up? Are you dating again? Do you regret it? My answers were simple. I was fine. No, I wasn't dating. And no, I didn't regret a damn thing. If anything, I regretted not seeing her true colors sooner. But what I didn't regret was choosing myself. For so long, I had been caught up in maintaining a relationship that was never really about love. Rachel had made sure our marriage looked perfect on the outside, but I had been miserable inside. Now, I could actually breathe. And I wasn't about to waste that freedom. One of the first things I did after the divorce was turn my attention to something that had been on my mind for a long time. My family's estate. The mansion my father left behind had always been more than just a house. It was a symbol of everything he had worked for. A place filled with memories, lessons, and the values he had instilled in me since childhood. After his passing, I had considered selling it. At the time, I wasn't sure if I could handle living in a place that reminded me so much of him. But now, I knew better. Instead of letting the house sit empty, I transformed it into something new. A luxury rental villa. Not just a home, but an experience. A place where people could come, celebrate, create memories. I spent months on renovations, modernizing parts of it, while still preserving the history that made it special. I added a swimming pool, an outdoor lounge, and a beautifully landscaped garden that guests could enjoy. And when it finally opened, it was a success. People loved it. The villa became a destination for weddings, anniversaries, and retreats. It wasn't just about making money. It was about continuing my father's legacy in a way that honored everything he had built. Rachel had always seen wealth as something to spend. But I had learned, thanks to my father, that wealth is something you grow. And that's exactly what I did. Without Rachel in my life, I had the time and space to figure out what I really wanted. Not what was expected of me. Not what someone else thought I should be doing. Just me. I took up old hobbies I had forgotten about. I started traveling, not the way Rachel had wanted, in five-star luxury resorts, but in a way that actually meant something. Exploring places for the experience, not the status. I reconnected with old friends. I strengthened my relationship with my mom, who had been quietly waiting for me to wake up and realize Rachel was never right for me. And most importantly, I started trusting myself again. For so long, I had ignored my instincts, letting Rachel manipulate and guilt-trip me into decisions I never truly wanted to make. Now, I listened to myself, and I didn't let anyone else dictate my life. Just when I thought I had heard the last of her, Rachel made one last desperate attempt to worm her way back into my life. She showed up at the villa. I was outside, talking to a couple who had just booked their wedding there, when I saw her. She looked different, less polished, less put together, like someone who had been struggling. She hesitated before walking up to me. "Daniel," she said, forcing a small smile. I gave her a nod but didn't invite her to sit. "Rachel." She shifted, glancing around at the villa, at the elegant setup, the guests enjoying their stay. "You really turned this place into something." I crossed my arms. "What do you want?" She exhaled. I wanted to talk." I waited. She licked her lips. "I made mistakes. I know that." I said nothing. "I was caught up in everything," she continued. "The money, the lifestyle. I thought that's what happiness was. But I see now that I was wrong." I tilted my head. "You see that now?" She swallowed. "Yes. And she hesitated. "I was wondering if maybe we could start over." There it was. The final play. Rachel, coming back, hoping to rewrite history. Hoping that I'd be stupid enough to give her another chance. I let out a slow breath. "Rachel." She looked up, a spark of hope in her eyes. "You stole from me," I said. "You tried to manipulate me. You changed the locks on a home that wasn't yours. You scammed yourself out of $360,000, and you only realized you made a mistake after your life fell apart." She flinched. I just thought. "You thought I'd still be the same man who ignored the red flags. But I'm not. And I never will be again." Her lips trembled. "So that's it?" I nodded. "That's it." She let out a shaky breath, glancing around again. "You're really doing well, huh?" "I am." Her eyes lowered, and for a moment, I almost thought she was going to apologize. But instead, she nodded. "I should go." I didn't stop her. And just like that, she walked away. For the last time, Rachel had been the wrong choice. But that didn't mean I regretted everything. Because through it all, I had learned the most valuable lesson of my life. Money is a tool, not a prize. Trust should be earned, not given freely. And love, real love, isn't about control, power, or financial security. It's about respect, honesty, and choosing each other every single day. I had made mistakes, but I had also made the right choice when it mattered most. I had chosen myself, and now I was living a life that was truly mine. One free of manipulation, one free of greed, one where I was finally, at peace.